Hey, what's up guys, I'm Praetorian and welcome back to Victoria 3, Voice of the People. So today's episode will be the finale for the series. I was planning on going a bit longer, episode 20 or so, just to get a few of these things that we've been working on done, like the Algerian departments, Indochina campaign, if that one will in fact work. We also have this great hunger event that will be finished up in 18 months. And I also wanted to, try and get our fleet built up, see if we could, I don't know if we build it up to the size of the British fleet, because they're already at almost 500 ships. But, just get our prestige up, since I think it's the fleet that's causing us to be in the number 2 place rather than the number 1 place. Because obviously our GDP is significantly higher than the British, especially after this past war. But I feel like, finishing that conflict against the British, getting our victory, that's a good place for us to end it here. In addition, the series is quite a bit less popular than the CK3 Tours and Tournaments campaign, so that'll allow me to focus more on that series, which is interesting considering the fact that, this is a newer game, and it's just not as popular of a game. Now, perhaps it has a smaller audience, given the nature of the game. CK3 is pretty popular, but then of course it had its very controversial launch as well. So CK3 is just a more popular game, I think. But yeah, if you look at episode 1, which you do got to keep in mind that the CK3 episode 1 has been out longer, since that expansion released a bit earlier than this one. But if you just look at the episode 1s, this series episode 1 has like a quarter of the views of the CK3 episode 1. And you can see all the way through the videos, it's just less popular, despite the fact that it has been out longer, so we're further in this series with that CK3, it's still getting more views with each video than this series is. But more importantly, I feel myself getting really irritated with Victoria 3 right now, and it's not because it isn't a better experience than it was, when we played that US series or Japan, because it certainly is. They've continued to improve it. I would definitely not make the argument that it's worse now than it was with those series. Maybe it has something to do with the idea of, familiarity breeds contempt. The more I play it, the more the issues that the game has bug me and bother me. Because it feels, first of all, like I've already experienced everything that the game really has to offer. And I've only done, I've done the 3 campaigns on the channel, and then maybe, 4 or 5 campaigns off camera. And overall, I feel like within those campaigns, I've done everything there is to do in the game, even though I haven't played as every country. Each country doesn't really provide a unique experience in Victoria. So when the game first launched, I very much still enjoyed it despite its lack of content. I was enjoying the overall game loop, basically just playing with the economy, since the war has always been a mechanic I didn't really like in Victoria. I felt like it wasn't well done. It just had too many problems. And in a game that's not supposed to focus on warfare, they take it completely out of your hands because it's not supposed to be a focus. The only time I turn down the speed of this game is during warfare. The whole purpose of the warfare system was to reduce micromanagement, and yet it feels like that's the only part of the game that I really truly have to micro. So it's just not well designed. So the warfare system has always been bad. But with the economic system, I actually was really enjoying that gameplay loop for a while. But even that's gotten a little bit boring and tiring. They've changed it up a little bit. There's only so many times you can do the same thing in a game. And, with other Paradox games, I feel like I get different experiences when I play as different countries or different cultures or different religions, whatever. With Victoria, I feel like that's not really the case. You can have a little bit of a different experience when you play, say, Russia or France or United States or China. But the overall gameplay loop that you're going to be doing is pretty much the same. You're passing the laws, you're building stuff in your states, and there's just not a lot more to it at this point. And that's often the case with Paradox games at launch. I've actually played this game quite a bit for a Paradox game at launch. Some of the other ones that released, I played a lot less. If you look at, like, say, I don't know, Stellaris, I really didn't like that game at launch, or EU4, I also didn't like at launch. And I didn't play it very much. So I played this game a lot more than those two, because I've enjoyed it more than those two at launch. Now, EU4 eventually became a much better game, and then it also became a worse game, and then a better game. It's just kind of been all over the place, just based on the period. It's been out for a long time. Stellaris is a game that's continued to improve. It's had its down points as well, but overall is a much better game. And I'm sure that this game will also continue to improve and will be much better a couple years from now. In fact, we're already seeing that. There's a patch that released today, and this is one reason why I decided to end the series, is because we are on this new patch, which seems to have made some massive changes, and it's also fixed several of the things I complained about in this campaign just from the last episode. I was talking about this huge problem that Paradox seemingly didn't want to fix or couldn't figure out how best to fix it, and that was not being able to demobilize your troops, which can result in this issue that we've had where we have our entire army raised up because of the war with the British, and we can't disband them because we kept having all these smaller conflicts that have emerged. Obviously, I don't need to tell you what's going on here. You guys are watching the series, but yeah, we've had this issue here. Well, now they have added a way to fix it. So basically, they did what they said they couldn't do because it would break the system. You can now demobilize an individual general. Now, they have made it so you can't just do it whenever you want. As you can see here, we can't demobilize this general until he's been mobilized for 6 months. Now, obviously, he has been mobilized for years, but given that this mechanic was just added, it hasn't, counted us as having him mobilized yet. So we'd have to wait 6 months here in the game before we'd actually be able to start demobilizing our generals. And then the way they did it is making it so it does have penalties. Again, why they couldn't have done this in the first place, I don't know. But that's really how they're trying to fix that problem, where they don't want to incentivize or encourage players to just be able to mobilize their generals whenever they want. For instance, during a diplomatic play to get the rival countries to take you serious. If you start mobilizing, makes them more likely to give up in the diplomatic play, especially if you mobilize a lot of troops, because they know it's going to be an expensive war that they're going to have to mobilize a lot of troops to fight you. And so it makes them a little bit more likely to give in, or it's supposed to anyways. So it's kind of a strategic choice when to mobilize your generals, and so they don't want you just doing it willy-nilly. So I get that. And so what they've done to kind of make you think about this still is add some penalties here. So first of all, when you demobilize, which again you can't do until 6 months, you're going to get this early demobilization penalty for 4 months, which it is decaying, so I imagine that means that it's going to slowly decrease, but it's a cost here of $51,500 to the government expenses, so incredibly expensive. So this does discourage you from just mobilizing generals, for nothing, because there is a cost to it. So is it worth the cost of mobilizing them? That's what you need to be considering. And then again, you have to wait the 6 months too. And so after waiting 6 months and paying for your troops, and then for 4 months paying this slowly decaying extra cost here, it's going to result in it being incredibly expensive mobilizing your generals. So it's not something you're just going to do for nothing. You're going to need a good reason to do it. There's going to be a penalty to doing so. And so this is probably what they should have done from the beginning here. But I'm glad they're able to figure out a way to make this happen. So it's funny that I was just talking about this last episode and getting all irritated about it when they released a dev diary talking about it. Whenever they do their dev diaries for this game, I think it's Wednesday or Thursday, and I hadn't read that dev diary yet when I recorded that episode on Friday, so I didn't know that they had done this. But yeah, technically they'd already announced that we were going to be able to demobilize our generals when I was getting irritated at the mechanic last episode. I just wasn't aware of it. But yeah, we now have that ability. There's been a lot of other changes with this patch as well, mostly to the French content. We talked about some of that earlier in the series, how they're changing up that divided monarchy mechanic that we interacted with to get Napoleon in power. In the beginning of the series, that has been changed significantly. So very, very different the way that works, as well as many of the other French mechanics. A lot of changes with agitators as well. And then one that's been a problem since the game first released is the unification mechanics, for Germany or for Italy. A lot of people had issues with those, it not working historically, doesn't work in a way that makes sense and can be aggravating, and again, just not the best representation of what happened historically. And so they have changed those mechanics up as well. I'm not entirely sure how they changed it, so I can't really go over it. I haven't read all the patch notes. I just know that there's been several entries on there about this, and that this is something that people have requested. So yeah, we're seeing Paradox deal with a lot of the issues that the players have had. And so it does kind of feel like, and this is one of my big issues, well, I'm glad they're fixing this game and all the problems we have. It feels like I'm playing an early access game, or like I'm a beta tester or something. And I don't like that about this game. And I know that, sometimes Paradox games are like that. Hoi 4 had a lot of issues at launch as well, but I still had a good time with it, and despite all the problems, I was still very much enjoying it. But it also had some major issues at launch, and so maybe you could say that's part of the Paradox experience. But I don't know, maybe I'm just getting too old, and I'm less willing to tolerate this type of stuff. I feel like the game should be good at launch, that the mechanics should work, that it should be well balanced. I know that it's going to be a Paradox game, and that it's going to be lacking content, and that's something that Paradox is going to improve over the years. And so my problem isn't with the Paradox model, as you might call it. They release these kind of bare bone games and then add to them over the years, if they're successful, of course. And then we end up getting a really awesome experience several years later, with all these expansions and patches. They create these very in-depth, detailed games that you probably wouldn't be able to get if they weren't able to work on it for years after launch. And so I'm not, speaking out against that model. That's how Paradox does things. That's what you sign up for, whether you like it or not. That's what you sign up for when you buy these Paradox games. That's how they do business. However, these games have to be better at launch. They need to be better balanced. They need to be playable. They may be lacking features. That's obviously not fine, but it's the way Paradox does things. But they need to be playable and fun. And that's where I feel like Paradox has failed to a degree with Victoria. It's not simply that it lacks content. It's also that it's not well balanced, and some of the mechanics were not well done. These are mechanics that we complained about before the game launched, and Paradox didn't want to listen to anybody about it because they felt like they knew best. And so I feel like that's where my issues with Victoria are, is that it's here at launch, since launch, it has these major issues, and certain mechanics have had to be completely redone. Legitimacy is one of those. So after their games launch, I want to see them, obviously fixing bugs. There's always going to be bugs these days. It's 2023. That's just the way these companies release their games these days. They're just full of issues, and they need to fix them in later patches. We can all complain about that model, but it's kind of the way it's done across the gaming industry. But yeah, they're going to be fixing bugs, and you expect that. But I want them to also focus on adding new content. But instead, Paradox has to be, using all these patches to be rewriting the content that the game launched with. So it's one thing when EU4 completely remakes the Rebellion system several years after the game launch. Because then it's like, the Rebellion system could have been better. And now that we've released a bunch of extra content, now we're going to rewrite this, remake it into something even better than what it launched with. But this is, the game hasn't even been out that long, comparatively. And they're over here rewriting a whole bunch of different features, changing up the way they work. Legitimacy has been, changed dramatically. The law system, or the way that they're enacted, has been changed dramatically. The warfare system has, just now been getting stuff that it should have had at launch. You should have been able to demobilize generals at launch. I don't agree that was something that they shouldn't have added, and they weren't. It wasn't that they weren't able to add it. It was that they were against adding it because they didn't see it as a problem. They felt like, the effects of not being able to demobilize generals was, not that big of a deal. It wasn't until players complained about it a lot that they decided to change it. And, it's good they're reactive, but I don't see, do they not play their own games? Because it feels like they don't sometimes, because I don't see how you wouldn't have an issue with that. You end up in this big war, you raise up your entire army, and you win or lose the war or whatever, the war's over, and now you're stuck with your entire army raised up as all these little conflicts start because you can't demobilize generals. I don't see how they didn't notice that. I noticed that on my first campaign. The first campaign I played in Victoria 3 was as Prussia, And I found myself having that issue multiple times in that first campaign where I couldn't demobilize my troops. It was a huge issue. So you should have been able to demobilize generals. I don't see how they didn't recognize that as an issue, especially when the players did before the game was even in their hands. When they made the announcement of the military system in those developer diaries, that was a huge concern for many players. We pointed that out in the developer diary. Well, what happens if another war starts? Will you be allowed to demobilize your troops? Or are you going to have to keep your entire army mobilized for a little tiny colonial conflict? And they told us, yeah, you'll have to keep them mobilized the whole time. And then people complained about that and said it was a horrible system. And Paradox said, no, we think that this is the best alternative. That it's not something that we're going to change. Now, of course, they did change it. It's great they did. But the reason why they didn't do it in the first place was because they thought they were right. And so you just constantly see that with Paradox. They don't want to listen to fans until after the game launches, and then you get the really negative response. And it just seems kind of, I don't know, you got to give them praise for listening to fans once the game releases, but why don't they listen to fans before the game releases? I don't understand that, because this is a consistent issue. It was the same problem with Imperator Rome. It was certain mechanics people complained about. They didn't want to listen. They said they knew what they're doing. Game releases, everybody hates it, then they fix it. I just feel like they don't learn the lessons from the past here, from their past experiences. The warfare system was terrible at launch. It's still not great. We've seen that as we play with it. It still has a ton of issues, and they're continuing to work on it. But again, it feels like this is a beta build. This is an early access game. You know, if they released it as an early access game, we might be more willing to accept the problems. But they didn't. It was a fully priced, full release game. So someone like myself, I don't really like early access games. I tend to avoid them. I really like to play a game when it's, not necessarily done. You can have expansions and patches that update the game and improve it. But when the developer's saying, like, this is a good experience, this is our 1.0 experience, this is what the game is supposed to be, we'll add to it to make it better, but this is going to be a good experience. And so I don't really like playing early access games or beta builds. And yet that's what it feels like we're doing here in Victoria 3. So that's my main issue with the game, really, guys. Is they're just completely rewriting aspects of the game and trying to improve all these mechanics that I feel like the game shouldn't have launched with those mechanics in the first place. I feel like it was a mistake. Like, the game really needed a bit more time in the oven. And Paradox also just needs to be a bit more open to the feedback of their fans in developer diaries and stuff. Like, why even do them if I guess you're hyping up the game, I suppose, letting people know what you're working on. But it seems like, to me, it's a very important part is that you get that early feedback. You figure out, how people are liking things. That's why you start them so early. You start the developer diaries sometimes, years before the game comes out. And so you get that early feedback. And it seems like you should take advantage of that early feedback, but Paradox doesn't generally. It seems like they don't really listen to their fans until after the game comes out, and so I think that's kind of a problem that they need to work on as a company. But yeah, my main issue with this game really just comes down to it just feels like an early access build as they completely rewrite feature after feature of a brand new game. I mean, again, in Paradox terms, obviously this game came out in October, but for a Paradox game, this one being 9 to 10 months old is a pretty new game overall. And so for it being such a new game and them having to rewrite all these features, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like good game design to me. And then also, and this is one of the biggest issues, is that for the fans who are familiar with Paradox style of doing things, that it's going to take them years to add the content to it. And so within the first year, you're only going to get so much extra content added to the game, but you'll get some. And so you're excited for, each year, the new expansions and patches as they add that new content. But when they're rewriting the mechanics that the game launched with and fixing all these many issues, that means they're not adding the new content. That means you have to wait longer for that new content. So that's my major issue, is that it just feels like that's what they're working on. They're spending all this time to improve the game that launched in such a sorry state, and they're not adding the new content that you'd expect to be getting in the first year, first 2 years, or whatever. And so we'll see that big expansion come next year, which that's the next big expansion, guys. There's supposed to be this big patch coming up this fall that is supposed to add some new content. But the big major expansion is not coming until 2024. So basically, when we get that patch in the fall, I don't know that I'm going to start a series with it, guys. Probably not. Maybe I will, depending on what they add, but I don't think so. It would have to be really good with a lot of major changes for me to want to hop back into it, because I just feel like, again, I've played the gameplay loop enough that I'm bored with it. It doesn't engage me anymore. I feel like that's a huge issue if your gameplay loop is the problem. That was not the problem with similar Paradox games that I enjoy when they launched. So CK3, Hearts of Iron 4, those are the Paradox games I probably play the most these days. And their gameplay loop at launch was fun. There was no problems with the gameplay loop. The problems were lack of content, particularly with CK3. There was a lack of content, a lack of features maybe that were in the previous games. There were quite a few things that didn't make it from CK2 initially into CK3, and I missed those mechanics and those features. So there was a lack of content, but the gameplay loop for both CK3 and Hoi 4 was fun. I enjoyed it, and so therefore I could keep playing it, even though it did lack content. But with this game, I don't know, I just don't feel the same way. At launch, I liked it a lot more, but it's not as engaging. And that's one of my biggest issues, is that the gameplay loop does feel, to me, feels a bit boring now. And so I'm not really enjoying it as much. It doesn't help that the warfare system is so bad, and I really dislike it. Again, it's not that it's hands-off. I'm fine with it hands-off. Actually, I was kind of excited about it being hands-off and seeing this new way of doing warfare, especially in a game like this where there is so much other stuff with the politics and the economic play. I felt like that wasn't a mistake. Some people feel that it was a mistake. I don't think so. I'm glad that Paradox tried something new, but it hasn't worked out because of mistakes they did make. And so the warfare system probably plays a big role in why I don't feel as engaged, because warfare is a key part of this game, even though Paradox said it wasn't going to be, because they're trying to represent the 19th century, which there was actually a lot of warfare in the 19th century. There wasn't as much warfare between great powers in the 19th century as there was in the century prior and the century after. So that's something I actually wrote a college paper on. I wrote a research paper about the European state system and its effect on the outbreak of conflict between great powers and how it compared with the 1700s and the 1900s. And that was one of my favorite papers that I actually wrote when I was in the university. But anyways, there wasn't as much great power conflict overall, but there still was a lot more than most people think. They still were fighting each other. Some of that was through like proxy wars and stuff, but there certainly was less warfare between great powers in the 19th century. But this game doesn't really represent that. There is a lot of conflict between great powers in this game, and so you need to have a decent warfare system, but this game doesn't, and so that's kind of a major issue. If it was what it said on the tin, if it was what they had tried to build, a game where it's more focused on diplomacy, where you get what you want through diplomacy rather than through warfare, although some people would say that warfare is an extension of diplomacy. But if you get what you want through the diplomatic plays without warfare, if that's what it was, and thus there wasn't that many conflicts, then the warfare system probably wouldn't be that big of an issue, but it doesn't work that way. There are a lot of wars, there's a ton of wars, particularly between great powers, and so therefore they really do need to have a better war system. It doesn't have to be hands-on, it can be this hands-off system, but it's got to be better. And so that's part of it, but it's not just that, guys. There's also the political system and the economic system. There's a lot of issues with this game. And so I don't see myself really going back to this probably until that major expansion releases. I think it's called Spheres of Influence. So that's probably going to be the next time we play Victoria 3. I think I'm done with the game for a little while, guys. I got to step away from it because, I'm just finding myself being irritated with it, which is a video game. It's not supposed to be irritating. I'd expressed this a little bit in the past series. I think that Japan series, I talked about it at the end. I said, hey, let's wait for these major patches to come out. They can fix the game a bit and all the issues it has, which we did. We waited for those major patches, and has improved the experience. They continue to make this a better experience. Each series, I feel like we had a better experience with the game than the last. The Japan series, it was a better experience than the US series. This one was a better experience than the Japan series. But because the game's been out longer and I've played it more, again, there's that just feeling of getting bored with it and just getting tired of dealing with these issues. I think it was still a fun series, especially in the beginning when I was liking all the new French content, which was nice because, you know, no other country had that much content. So it made it feel fresh, the experience. So I really enjoyed that. And I look forward to when they do add more unique content for each country. Kind of make that a more fresh experience when you play a new country they haven't played before with that new content, or maybe you're playing them a second time. But yeah, I did enjoy the beginning, even though, you know, some of the new mechanics weren't great and it still had all the issues it had before. You know, I was overall still enjoying it. It's just been, you know, over the course of the series and dealing with some of the old complaints and some of the new problems and stuff that I've kind of gotten a little bored with it and a little irritated as well. So yeah, I did enjoy the initial part of the series and engaging with that new content and some of the new mechanics, and also I hadn't played for a while, so we got to see many of those changes that came in the free patches before the Voice of the People patch. And so that was nice, since there were many parts that did feel almost like a new game. So obviously legitimacy was changed significantly, and the way the laws work too. We saw those changes too, and the revolutions. Yeah, again, it's just overall becoming a better game with each patch. But I do hope you guys enjoyed the series and found it helpful for what the Voice of the People expansion had to offer and what the patch had to offer. If you did, make sure you leave a like on this video, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment. If you're looking for anything else to watch, check out the front page of our channel. Got a ton of videos, all sorted by genre, so you should be able to find something that you'd enjoy. If you're looking for any links, check out the description of any of our videos. Find links to our PayPal, Patreon, and Teespring store if you'd like to help support the channel. You also find a link to our Discord if you'd like to join our community. And finally, find links to all of our social media if you'd like to follow us on those. So I do hope to see you guys in another series, maybe on that CK3 series, which has been pretty fun. It's a roleplay series, which we're on episode 20-something at this point. So yeah, maybe go check out that if you haven't already. And thanks for watching.